Welcome to the Plant Spirit Podcast on connecting with plant consciousness and the healing wisdom of nature. I'm your host, Sara Artemisia, and I am deeply honored to introduce our next guest to the show today. Dan Wahpepah is from the Anishinaabe, Kickapoo, and Sac Fox tribes. He grew up with his community's cultural ways and has been politically active with the American Indian movement and spiritually active through tribal ceremonies. Dan started the Rogue Valley Powwow, American Indian Cultural Center, and Red Earth Descendants. And he's also a board member of Natives of One Wind Indigenous Alliance, Rogue Climate, and Pipeline Fighters. As a part of his tradition, Dan is a drum keeper and drum chief, and he works with traditional ecological knowledge and permaculture. And his life's work is focused on the preservation of this earth for future generations. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
It's absolutely amazing to have you on the show. Your work in the world is so powerful. And I'm so grateful for your presence and your work in the world. And one of the things that I know you work very deeply with is with native permaculture, and particularly with decolonizing permaculture. And so I'd love to just start there, and particularly recognizing that we are moving through such a huge transition on the planet, and the ways of being that wouldn't even say that they actually worked, but the ways of being that we have been moving in planetarily, particularly in the Western society for the past, hundreds, thousands of years, is really not going to serve or work at all moving forward. And so I'd love to hear, in your experience, in your work, really, what are the tools that can help us move into this transition as gracefully and in alignment as possible with the planet, with the earth, and with the plants?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to happen is decolonization. And a lot of people have different ideas of what colonization and decolonization is. So colonization basically is colonialization is the act of a foreign power moving into and colonizing a different country. Colonization is what happens in your mind after that has happened. So my people have been colonized for 500 plus years, but Europeans have been colonized for thousands of years. They're so wet with the water of colonization, they don't even know they're wet. So it's a simple fact of recognizing that the colonization is what put us in this dire straits that we are in. And that in order to get out of these dire straits, we need to figure out Mother's systems, how we can base our societies off of her systems. Susan Samard has the Wood Wide Web. That is an example of how we ran our societies in a cooperative sense. So yeah, we the decolonization factor of it. What it does is it does two things primarily. It gives you an over-endowed sense of cognitive dissonance while robbing you of critical thought, allowing you to think that the things that are unacceptable are okay, like 60 years of arable soil left, like fossil fuel burnings, like overconsumption, stealing our future generations' resources, things like this that we should be thinking of instead of consuming, thinking of how can we preserve life for the seventh generation from now ahead of us.
So important. So important. What, in your experience, are some tools that can really, some practical tools, spiritually connected tools that we can use to really help us come back into this way of right relationship, into this way of really working with the mother systems?
Well, I guess a lot of what we do is pray. So when we pray, we do something. Here's a good example. Like in the Bible, I think Jesus says, "Pray for your enemies." Of course, we have the same saying. Many cultures do. But what happens when you do that is you open up a conduit between yourself, the universe, all that is, that person who you're praying for, like say my sister who might have the flu, and the earth, and to me, where because I get all my energy from the earth, so it goes from myself to the universe to my sister to the earth to me. A circle like that. That's a conduit. And so when I pray for my sister, I might get the flu. I might break a leg. I might get injured somehow because the natural law says all good deeds have a price, and that's natural law. So when you pray for somebody, that's a good deed. That might come back at you. So we use tobacco because there was a little boy who sacrificed himself, and that little boy who sacrificed himself was full of potential, and he had sacrificed himself, and he became that first plant named tobacco. And so there's a sacrifice in the tobacco. So if I pray for my sister, I'm opening up that conduit, and that sacrifice of the tobacco allows that reciprocity to not affect me in a negative way. So when we pray, we are getting away from our selfish nature. We are putting ourselves out toward others, towards our community, towards our elder relatives, toward our future generations. This is a process of decolonization. And so when you also drop tools of decolonization, media, military, sports, fashion, all these things that colonize you, and start focusing on plants, and start focusing on family, start focusing on community, that's a decolonized mind right there. So when we are able to focus toward health and stop consuming what is meant to be consumed, then we are in the process of decolonizing, because all of that out there, all the society has to go away in order for us to have the good life with the giveaway mentality, a giveaway society with a food economy, living with a good mind, decolonizing, naturalizing to the places, our biospheres that we live in, and re-indigenizing. And so that's a big, huge piece of what I'm trying to do with permaculture, is because I come from a traditional ecological knowledge background. So what I'm trying to do with permaculture, I got my PDC, and I'm trying to reacculturate permaculture to the biospheres that they do their work in. And who has been taking care of those biospheres is the indigenous people that have been taking care of those biospheres, that with place knowledge of 1,000 generations that can combat climate change, global warming. So that's kind of what my big thing is. The Permaculture Institute of North America should be Permaculture Institute of Turtle Island, because the language is all a part of colonization as well.
I totally feel that. Could you tell us more about your work with decolonizing permaculture? I'd love to hear more about that, your work with native permaculture, and particularly there's this dynamic element that I feel with your work where it brings the depth of relationship into permaculture, and particularly with what Native people have always known is how to be in right relationship, how to create food forests and gardens that are seamlessly integrated into the web of life here. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Like what are some current projects you're doing with your work? And also, how is it possible for folks who have had a more traditional permaculture education to start deepening in that relationship with the consciousness of the land that they're working with, and the plants, and the place, the bioregion that they're working with?
Permaculture has been operating autonomously from the land's original inhabitants since it got here. And many permaculture places have checked in with the local tribes. So, because that's part of the people care element of permaculture, is to honor, So the work I'm doing with permaculture is I taught last year in North Carolina a Permaculture Foundations course, co-taught with Megan Toben And the results from the students' reviews was so positive that one of her funders wants to put it together a Convergence. So he's going to pay for hotels and plane fares to get to all these tech, traditional ecological knowledge people and permaculture people to a Convergence, so that we can start a process of a way that permaculture practitioners can work with the tribes in their local areas. Because culture, we as Native people were handed down one medicine bundle, and that single medicine bundle reflects differently from the land it's from. Mountain tribes are different from desert tribes, which are different from river tribes, different from woodland tribes, different from prairie tribes, etc. And so the permaculture people need to develop their own culture, and culture comes from the land. And what's the best way to develop that culture is to get in cahoots with those who have been taking care of that land. And that means naturalizing to the land. That means learning the stories of, like around here, coyote, acorn woman, beaver, and back in my area, how the bear's tail got short, how maple syrup went from syrup to sap, how the loon got so flat, how the loon got red eyes, all these things that connect us. So we had clan systems as well that connected us with our elder relatives. So all these things can come back into being, in the new era that we're stepping into. But before we step into this new era, we're going to have to learn some very, very hard lessons about decolonizing. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fun. It's best that we work on our systems now rather than ad hoc in situ after everything hits the fan.
Yeah. I totally feel that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Something else you just were talking about really resonated with the storytelling, and of course, the culture comes from the land, and who is it that has known what the culture of this land is the Native people that have been living here for thousands and thousands of years. And so I love that you're doing that work. Actually, before I ask this next thing, I am curious, is that Convergence, the tech, the traditional ecological knowledge Convergence, is that already in the works? Like, does that already have a launch date or a date that'll be going live, or is it still in the initial planning stages?
It is definitely in the initial planning stages, but we're looking at end of May, beginning of June, probably the beginning of June.
Amazing. In 2022?
Yes.
Amazing. I would love to hear more about that as that goes on, and share that with everyone who's listening here, because that is good. I'm like, that is so key. That's such a key bridge to helping us move from this colonized, patriarchal, crumbling systems that are currently happening into this next era on the planet. That's such a key bridge, what you're doing there. And I would love to hear more about that as that evolves. The other thing that's coming up, though, as you're sharing all this, is about storytelling and the power of storytelling. And I'm curious if there's any stories that come to mind for you right now, or that feel in resonance to share, either about this time, because storytelling, and particularly with my understanding of the Native way of storytelling, is it's very multi-layered, about learning different moral codes, or even lessons or prophecies for the future of like how to navigate through certain types of situations. And I'm curious, is there any, particularly with right now being the winter time, it's like, as long as humanity has existed on this planet, this has traditionally been a time all over the earth where people have shared stories. Are there any stories coming to mind for you right now about the time that we're in, and some lessons or some ways that we can gracefully navigate through this chapter on the planet that you'd like to share?
Well, I think that we're in a crossroads of prophecy. Blue star Kachina has fallen to the earth. Trees are dying from the top down. Rivers are catching on fire. Massive fish kills. The people are eating their children. And that means consuming their resources. So yeah, we're definitely in the crossroads of prophecy. And I guess the what really we have to reattune to is the spiritual nature, the 50% spiritual nature that we've been entrained out of, so that we can be harvested. So that we have to readopt the spiritual nature of what is out there, so that we can become one with it. So we have to shed what we've been taught, and to re-embrace spirituality, and because that's changes us. That helps us to become like a household. Instead of become a consumer, a household can become a producer. So can we as well. Like biodiversity begets biodiversity, but cultural biodiversity allows you to play 3D chess, because now you're thinking of a whole completely through a whole different lens, through a whole different perspective. So learning these cultures is imperative, and us sharing cultures is very important. We have a song in our ceremonies that says life, 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 life. And that's what our ceremonies are about. The sacred pipe, that's a man and a woman coming together. The sweat lodge, that's the womb of the mother. The stones are the sperm coming in. This is life. This is sacred union.
Yeah, I love that. What you were just sharing, that. I mean, that song is so powerful. Life, 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 and really living viscerally, having that direct connection again. So, so important. I know one of the other things that you are so connected to is this aspect of how when we come back into balance with our elder relatives, which in your words so eloquently is the rest of the universe, we achieve inner peace and a feeling of connection. I love that this is such a deep part of your work. And I'm curious if you could just share a little bit about that. Like what does it really mean to come back into balance with our elder relatives? And do you have any suggestions for folks listening about maybe even just some really practical, grounded things we can do to really come back into balance?
Yeah. So your name, Artemisia, is a mugwort. And I've sat with mugwort for periods of time, just getting to know it. And I had a reciprocal relationship with mugwort. And I would offer tobacco to mugwort to thank it for its life, for its medicine that it's given me, for helping me and clear my mind and chase away bad spirits. And so that relationship is imperative for us to have with our elder relatives, because our brains didn't get so big just because we talk amongst ourselves. The social nature of our brains getting big. Our brains got big because of our relationship with the elder relatives out there. That's how it got so big, and how to do life. We have a woman was asked, a native woman was asked, imagine yourself alone in the woods. And she couldn't do it because that's where her family is. That's where her life comes from. And so they put her, or they said that she lacked a second level capability of thought. So, but it was them who lacked the second level capability of thought, So, we have to come back in right relationship with our plants. And I'm going to tell the story of tobacco, because that's how I and my people were taught to offer. So there was this little boy. He was born in the time of great strife, great suffering. The people had lost their way. And there was a pestilence, and there was drought, and there was disease. There was warfare. And so the tribe called all the bands together and for a grand council to see what they could do about this strife that they were going through. And during this time of this strife, there was a boy who lived. His name was Asema. And Asema had special powers. Where his flowers grew around his lodge all the time. And when you talked to him, you received a healing. So they knew that Asema was going to be a great medicine person, a great leader, a great singer, a great storyteller, or something. And so during this council, they invited all the tribes in, all the bands in, to come and see what they could do about this hard times they were going through. And they were coming up with no answers. And so in the middle of this council, in walks a Sema. Now, normally in council, a little boy would not be able to be allowed to speak, but recognizing the medicine that a Sema carried, they allowed him to speak. And he told them, he says, I had a vision. He says, in my vision, you're going to take me and you're going to tie me to a stake and you're going to burn me. That's what the vision said. And then the tribe said, no, Asema, we're going to need you after we're through with this. You're going to be a great leader. We're going to be a great healer, a great singer, something, And so they denied his vision. And then a year went by and half the tribe had died. And again, they called in a great council. And again, walks us in Asema. He says, I tell you truly, the spirits say this, that you must take me to the stake and you must burn me. And so with a great reluctance and a great suffering of everyone, they took Asema and they tied him to a stake and they burnt him with the instructions to come back the following year. And in the ashes of Asema was the first tobacco plant. So in this tobacco plant is a sacrifice of Asema, that prayer conduit I was telling you about earlier. But also in the most performed experiment in the world is a quantum physics experiment. It's called the double slit experiment. So they realized that through this experiment that a photon can be both a particle and a wave. Okay, but now what they're figuring out is before it's a photon, a particle, or a wave, before it's a photon, it's potential. It's pure potential. And that's what Asema was. It's pure potential. And so in that tobacco is power of pure potential and the sacrifice that Asema made. So that's why we use tobacco. And so I suggest that people use this tobacco and grow your own. Don't support the systems that oppress us. Grow your own tobacco and develop a relationship with that tobacco and sit down with that tobacco and speak with that tobacco and talk with that tobacco. And get to know that tobacco, because that tobacco is a very, very powerful spirit. And that tobacco wants to help you. So we pray to the spirit of this tobacco and we get to know it and we tell it about ourselves, who we are, and that way we have a relationship with this tobacco. And that's called a right relationship.
Amazing. Well, Dan, thank you so much for sharing that. So powerful. And such wide-reaching implications of that story to every aspect of life. Like how is it possible to be in right relationship with tobacco, with the sacred plant spirit, with every element of life? So yeah, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your wisdom, and you're so humble and so wise, and I'm so grateful for your presence here. So thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure.
And you can find out more about Dan's upcoming work at the Eco Institute at eco-institute.org and at the Red Earth Descendants at redearthdescendants.org. And thanks so much for listening and joining us today on the Plant Spirit Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and please follow to subscribe, leave a review, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode.